Hello, BookTube. Welcome back to my channel. I am so excited to be here today because I have the amazing Lady Jane Books back again. And this is actually our first live show for the Black Hearts Book Club, which is a book club I started on my channel that has some sort of dark theme. So, mystery, thriller, dark academia, nonfiction. And the first book that we read was Opium and Absinthe by Lydia Kang. And this book was a bit of a mystery, but it was also very heavy on the historical fiction. So, Lady Jane actually suggested this book for our first book club pick. And I have to say, Jane, it was awesome. So, thank you for that recommendation.
You're welcome. Thank you for letting me pick the first one. This has been on my TBR since I heard about it, like about 2 years ago, I think. And so I kept on mentioning it to Carrie. I'm like, wouldn't this be cool? Wouldn't this be cool? And then Carrie gave me the opportunity to pick the very first pick of Black Hearts Book Club. So I thank you very much for allowing me to do that because this is a little bit of a dream come true.
Well, thank you, Jane. We did have a pretty lively discussion. We did do our group chat on Instagram, and we had a couple of other people involved. Katie Reads and Rants, who also has a BookTube channel, was very active in the group, and also Cape Cotter, who is one of my subscribers. So he had a lot of great insights into the book, and I hope we will get into some of those today. I will tell folks that after we go over kind of our overall impressions of the book, we will probably get into some spoilers because we're just going to talk about what happens in the book. So it's, inevitable. So if you haven't read the book after the first 5-10 minutes or so, you might want to dip out and come back later. So overall, Jane, what was your impression of this book?
Well, first of all, I was really intrigued just by the premise. I had read the synopsis quite a while ago, and it always sounded like a book that sounded very creepy and unsettling, and it was. From the very first scene, I just really appreciated the atmosphere. This is in, I think, 1899, if I believe, New York. I believe it's somewhere
Yes.
in the US. Yeah, New York. So that's like during the Gilded Age, and it's during this really like interesting time in history. And this book really captured that. So I had never read a book in that setting before, so I was really intrigued about it. And I was also intrigued about this whole idea of a mystery, a murder mystery set during this time. So I had high expectations for it. And thankfully, those expectations were completely met throughout this entire book. So, what did you think, Carrie?
I loved it. It had all the dark, kind of creepy vibes
Mhm.
of that time period. I think the Gilded Age is a really interesting time period historically because you have the opulence of the era, and all of these beautiful things and the grand wealth. But then you also have, on the flip side of that, the squalor that people
Mhm.
were living in and the tenements and all of these major societal issues, high crime rates, um, opium addiction, as we'll see in the book. And I really felt like this book used the time and place very effectively for the storyline. She really was able to incorporate a lot of those things from the time period into the book, and I really enjoyed that.
Me too. I absolutely love that. And something I really appreciated about it is that the synopsis and the whole feeling of what the story was about was carried throughout the book. So many times I talk about where this sounds like such a creepy book. It sounds really interesting and unsettling, and then it's not. But this one stayed true to that tone throughout the entire book, and I was very impressed by that.
Yeah, and I enjoyed the mystery part of it because it was a good balance for me of keeping me invested to where I was trying to guess what was going to happen, but not growing too predictable. I don't want to have a mystery where it's too convoluted and too confusing because then it's no fun. Like
Mhm.
I feel like I'm not really playing the game, But with this one, I felt like I was in the game. I didn't feel like it was too smart for me. I felt like that, I could figure out some of this mystery. And some of our predictions were on point.
They were. I was actually going to say on the flip side too is that something that annoys me is when a mystery is way too obvious. And I was so nervous on certain parts of this that I'm like, oh, it's definitely this person. I've already called this. And I was wrong, Carrie. I was so wrong. Partially, I was partially wrong. But that's what I really appreciated about it too, is that not only was it not overly complicated that no one could have guessed it, but it wasn't dumbed down in a way either. So I thought that kept us reading and made for a very interesting mystery.
Yes, very, very smart mystery. Um, Cape Codder said it wasn't obvious, but it made sense in the end. Yes. And
Exactly.
yeah, it lined up with some of our thoughts in a different way, in an unexpected way.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really nice. So, what did you think, Jane, of our main character Tilly?
I loved Tilly. To be honest, I was a little bit hesitant when I first started in the book because I felt like it was going to be kind of an immature character. But, excuse me, as we delve deeper into the story, I really appreciated her sense of adventure and also her self awareness. So, Tilly is basically this youngish girl who's living in this Gilded Age, and she's an eligible person to be married. And so I was really worried that it was going to be very limiting for her in that way, that that was going to be the main focus of the story. But she was so smart and so well developed that that concern went away immediately when I started reading this. I loved her like mental tone. I loved her sense of humor. I loved everything about it. I think she was one of the best main characters that I have read so far. What did you think, Carrie?
I agree. And I see Katie reads and rants
Hey,
in the
Katie.
chat. And she was definitely active in the group and had a lot of thoughts about Tilly in this story. So, Katie, feel free to share your thoughts for
Chime
sure.
in. Chime in.
Um, but yeah, I agree. I feel like Tilly was a very smart character. She was a very independent character, but she didn't go too far. And what I mean by that is I feel like there's a tendency the last few years to take a modern character and plop them into an historical setting.
Yeah, I agree.
And that feels very awkward and it just doesn't feel authentic for me. But I feel like for Tilly, it was authentic. And when she gets to a place where she can possibly fulfill some of these dreams and answer some of these questions, I feel like it's a natural progression, and it was believable
Yes.
for the time period. She knew there were certain expectations. She still played along with a lot of those expectations because she's in this wealthy family, and like you said, she's an eligible young lady, and so there are loads of um, responsibilities that go along with that. And um, yeah, I felt sorry for Tilly for a good bit of the book because she is a woman in that era, and so a lot of things that are happening to her are kind of out of her control, a little bit. And I guess that leads us into talking a bit about her addiction because
Mhm.
Tilly, at the beginning of the book, she has this horseback riding accident and she breaks her collarbone. And the doctor, of course, at the time prescribes laudanum, which was very common. And then, as we see throughout the book, she is dragged into this addiction, and then we see her taking morphine, and we just see the addiction become part of her and part of the storyline as well. So what did you think, Jane, about how that affected Tilly as a character
Mhm.
and how the author really handled that?
So I actually thought that was a brilliant development. That's not something that I've seen very often in literature, particularly about like a historical fiction type of literature, circling around a very wealthy young woman. I had never read a book about that. So, and and to shoot off of that, I also didn't know how big of an issue it was historically that all these wealthy women were battling these type of demons for a number of reasons. So that was a learning opportunity for me, but I do think it was handled in a very delicate way by the author. But at the same time, she didn't shy away from it as well. She was very blunt with, yes, she's using more and more and more. She's going into morphine now. We're going into heroin at one point. And it was a really believable progression. As you said, you can see that it wasn't going to get better for her, that there was this overarching downward spiral for Tilly. And I really appreciated that it was explored within this book, and I thought it was handled very well.
Yeah, I did too, and I didn't know this when we started reading the book, but Lydia Kang is actually a doctor. She's a physician, and I don't know if that maybe is one of the reasons why she was able to handle this topic so well.
Yeah.
Because of course, opioid addiction to prescription medication is rampant. It's a huge epidemic now. So I feel like there were a lot of parallels, and even for someone who has no experience with any sort of addiction, it was relatable because we have this young girl who her sister's murdered in a very mysterious way. She's injured, so she's in physical pain, she's in emotional pain, she's going through this grieving process. And so you could really relate to her. And she's a young lady. So of course, if the doctor tells you
That's
to
it.
do something, that's what you do. And then of course, there were people in the story who were enablers. James, who was her sister's ex-fiance, or fiance up until the time of her murder. He was a huge enabler, and there was also a female character named Hazel, who enabled Tilly as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, you could really identify with it, and it did impact the story in small ways, in very believable ways, because throughout the story, other people start to notice that Tilly doesn't look so good, and she's, different, when she takes the medicine. So, and Katie says, the doctor made me so mad prescribing morphine because she's hysterical. Yeah, I mean, that was something that really got me, but it was very appropriate for the era because, any woman who spoke out and was independent and had a voice, that was not deemed appropriate. And they were labeled as being hysterical.
Mm-hmm.
And if you were hysterical, one of the remedies to that would be opium. And of course, when you think about that, and you think about the fact that most of your addicts in the late 1800s were these middle to upper class women, I really think it speaks to their unhappiness and the feeling that they're trapped in their situation. And yeah, that was really hard to read. I do agree with that, Katie.
I agree. Something that we've also touched on before in some other buddy reads is exactly the fact that if a doctor said do this, that's what you did. It's that blind trust. I think we talked about that in
Dr. Cream,
and also I think in the other one that we read. So, and to see, that's it. And to see it played out in a way that, at the beginning she said, well, it's medicine, it's supposed to help me, it's, it can't be that bad. And then to go down into this path where, well, the doctor now prescribed morphine, and that can't be too bad either, and that's even better, and I'm going to feel so much better. And then going, to, what James was pushing on her, it was scary to me because, again, even like when she was getting better, there were still doses of it within the medicine, as we're led to believe. So that really illustrated for me how in that century it could become so rampant, is because the doctors within that time frame were pushing it, whether probably unknowingly, but that's where it became a very dangerous path for so many people. So I thought that was a really interesting way it was handled within the book. It wasn't that she was buying it off the street, it was literally being prescribed to her in pretty magnanimous doses.
And one thing they bring out in the book, which I thought was pretty clever, even when she goes to the treatment house,
That's right.
you know, she goes to this facility to basically get off of the morphine. They're still drugging her with something, and she doesn't know what's in it. It's some sort of gold concoction, and she's talking about how she doesn't think there's any gold in it, and she wants to get this medicine tested to see what they're putting in her body. But that was common for the era for people to sell these tonics, these elixirs, right. And there were no government regulations saying they had to list any of the contents. You know, this is before the Pure Food and Drug Act, which was in the 19 teens, I believe, early 1900s. So
before that.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting how they wove that in, and also all of these very notable corporations. So at one point she talked about Coca-Cola and that being the ideal brain tonic, which I thought was pretty cool because, you know, the whole history of Coca-Cola and the fact that at one point it did contain cocaine. And actually I learned something I didn't know when I posted an article for the group about the history of Coca-Cola. I didn't realize that they actually have a special agreement to this day with the FDA that allows them to import the coca leaves, because they don't obviously have cocaine in Coca-Cola anymore, but they do use the coca leaves for some of the flavoring. So I thought that was kind of an interesting little piece of history that if you weren't aware of it, you know, it's kind of neat to throw in there. And then also Bayer, you know, the aspirin company, the medicine company. They're the company that produced the heroin tablets that James gave to Tilly because they were going to help her kick her other drug habit.
Yeah, that whole exchange, I kind of laughed, to be honest, because here she is in a program that's supposed to cure her, and James is supposed to be helping her, and then he's just like, oh, it'll help you, it'll cure you, it's heroin tablets. And I was like, oh my gosh, is that how far removed that James was? That I just saw no good coming out of James giving her those tablets. Like, I don't know if it was on purposeful. I believe it was, but even if it was accidental, I'm like, oh, James, no. So just the whole exchange was horrible, but it was almost a little bit comical for me as well, because I'm like, oh, here we go. So I thought that was an interesting way to introduce that next step, I think.
Sorry, get my water in. I always tease that every time I do a live show, I'm like drinking a gallon of water, but and Katie said, and James really just wanted a meek and subservient wife, which drove me crazy because Tilly had so much more to offer. Yeah, and you know, when we get to this part where James is really kind of pushing the drugs on Tilly, you know, like you said, even at that point where she's trying to wean herself off of the morphine, that's when I started to become suspicious of him. Because in the beginning of the book, you know, of course, everyone suspects James has killed his fiancée Lucy, because that's who you always suspect in these things. And so immediately I thought, well, it can't be him. That's too obvious. But once he started kind of being a pusher with Tilly, then I was very suspect of his motivations. I mean, that really made me question him a good bit. So I guess we should talk about our favorite suspects. So who was your favorite suspect, or the one that you suspected the most of being the murderer?
So to be honest, at first I was thinking James, because I mean, I thought it was like a financial type of thing, you know. It would just very early on he gave me the creeps just from his interaction with Tilly at the funeral, being like, oh, we're the only two suffering, and I'm like, that was quick, James, you know, let's bury her first. But then honestly, I really liked the introduction of Tom into the story, and I was really intrigued by Tom. Tom is the physician's son who's suffering from a bout of ailments, and I noticed that there was just enough about him that made like the reader interested in his story, but not enough to like eliminate him from suspicion. So I wanted to learn so much more about Tom, and I feel like I didn't get a lot, but that was kind of like my intriguing character suspect in mind. How about you, Carrie?
Well, I think we all know that I suspected Dr. Erickson. And I don't know if I'm a little jaded after what we've read previously about doctors in this era.
It's not the
Jane,
doctor. Dang it.
I don't know if I was thinking about Dr. Cream. I don't know. But I just know that there were so many suspicious circumstances around this doctor. You know, he doesn't go outside during the day, and he has these weird eating habits, and he doesn't eat in front of people, and his son is very sick. And I just became suspect of him. And the first thing that came to my mind was Munchausen syndrome.
That's what I thought
You know,
too. I thought that too. I knew there was something going on there.
I'm like, you know, this kid Tom, he has every ailment that you could possibly think of. And his father is pretty much keeping him in this drug-induced stupor. And he doesn't seem to get well ever. So I was just immediately suspicious of Munchausen syndrome. And then I started to really think about the crime and the fact that, you know, the victims are drained of blood and there's no blood at the crime scenes. So that led me to believe something is happening with the blood, which made me
Yes.
suspect the doctor even more because I'm thinking he's doing some sort of experimentation. You know,
Yeah.
he's trying to cure his son, and he's doing some sort of experimentation with this blood. So,
That's what I
yeah,
thought
I
too.
was immediately suspicious of him. But to your point as well, Tom was kind of odd. The whole Erickson family, the mom, the dad, and the son, they had a weird dynamic, and there was abuse there. The mom was physically abused and verbally abused by Dr. Erickson. So
Mhm.
yeah, it was kind of strange. And Cape Cotter says at one point I half suspected Grandmama might have had something to do with it based on her wanting to move on and her trashing Lucy after her death. Hmm.
That's good. Yes. Yeah.
Yes, I know. I know. Cape Cotter did not. He did not like Grandmama.
Yeah.
Grandmama was kind of a character.
She was too much. She was too much. She had to chill out a little bit.
Well, anyone who has a large pet bird, you know, to me, because I'm fearful of birds, that was
Oh, there
automatically
you go.
creepy.
The scene where she cut the wings, I was like, oh
Oh
my goodness.
gosh.
I was like, that's a metaphor for this entire book. Oh my
Yes.
goodness.
Yes, I thought so
That
too. I'm
that
like,
that freaked me out. I was like, no, don't do that to the bird. Stop it.
she's clipping Tilly's wings, and what's going to happen to Tilly next? Yeah, that really made me kind of worry about
Yeah.
Tilly for
Yeah,
sure.
that made me sad. That made me
Yeah.
sad. Mhm.
So, besides Tilly, what other characters in the book were you excited to learn about, or did you enjoy reading about the most?
This is going to be so boring, but I really wanted to know more about Tom. I think
Yeah.
it's the way that he was introduced, because he was kind of introduced in this very like charming but meek and weak character, but he at the very beginning seemed to almost encourage Tilly in her like pursuit of knowledge, because I think they met in the library, right? And she was like flipping through books or something like
Yes.
that, and he was like, "Oh,
Mhm.
that one." And so I was really, really hopeful that they were going to be like more friends, or he was going to there was going to be more of a storyline with him and her, um, and also just like getting to know his existence in that state, you know what I mean? Like what he was feeling like and what his days were like, because he didn't leave his room and he just read all day and he was sick. I thought that was a really interesting part of the story. I wanted to know more about what it was like to kind of be him in that environment. So I really, I am disappointed that we didn't get as much as I would hope for. Um, but yeah, he was a creepy character that I wanted to know a little bit more about. How about you, Carrie?
Yeah. I'm gonna have to go with Ian.
Ian, yes.
because Ian's got a lot. He's got a lot of different things going on. I believe they were Russian immigrants.
Hmm.
I think he and his family were Russian immigrants, and I think they were also Jewish. And
I
of
believe
course
so too.
he's lost his whole family, so his whole family has died, and he's pretty much on his own. He's a very street smart character. He's this newsy, walking the streets selling newspapers, but he is very much like Tilly in that he wants more. And he also wants to make it in the newspaper business. And um, yeah, I just really enjoyed him, and I felt like his relationship with Tilly was just so endearing because as she's going through this drug addiction, he's the one person who's really trying to rein her in. He's really trying to be a healthy, positive influence on her, to the point that, at one point in the book, there's this really, really sweet first kiss scene. And it's probably one of the sweetest, just rainbows and butterflies type of kiss scene you could have. And then later in the book, when Tilly tries to kiss him and he can tell that she has taken the opium, he shuts down, and he is very closed off. And I feel like that was a very authentic response for someone who is in love with an addict, you
Mm,
know? So I really liked that dynamic in the story. I feel like that is something that modern readers, if they've had any person who struggled with that, they could probably relate to Ian.
I agree. And I think what I really liked about that scene too is that, and a couple of other scenes that was discussed between the two characters, was that we are in Tilly's perspective, and sometimes the effect of what she was on didn't always come through because we didn't have any other, like, we didn't have an outside perspective. So when Ian said something like, "Oh, I can tell, it's very obvious, blah 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 blah," we almost have that same shock as Tilly, be like, "It is," like, wait a minute. And
Right.
then I found myself going back to read, and I'm like, "Oh yeah, it really is." And I liked his honesty with her at that point because that showed me that he cared for her enough to tell her the truth about how bad her situation was getting. So that's what I found very endearing, and I agree with you that it was a really, really interesting relationship.
And I kind of liked how he was almost like a fatherly figure to some of the kids that were on the
Mm,
street. Some of the other newsies who are out there. Of course, this is the ugly part of the Gilded Age. We have child labor and these unfair labor practices that pretty much condemn some of them to death. And Ian kind of looked out for this little crew
yeah.
that he had, and that was very sweet to read about as well. Um, I guess we have to address the elephant in the room,
The
which is
elephant. What do they smell like?
vampires.
Vampire. Oh, all right. I was gonna.
Oh yeah, what do
Yeah,
they
I
smell like?
was. I was making a joke about the person she was
That is
writing
so
to, be
funny.
like, "What does an elephant smell like?" And I'm like, "Really? That's your question?"
So
Okay.
actually, Jane, go ahead and explain that little bit to the story because I think that's pretty funny. That's pretty
So,
funny.
so within the story, Tilly is a fan of this. I forget her name. It's like a
Nellie Bly.
Nellie Bly. That's it. It's like a Ask Abby or something like that. So this adventurous writer Nellie Bly, who wrote a really great article, I think, about the asylums at that time, and
Yes,
it
she
was basically
actually
a
went
very
undercover.
right.
Yep.
She went out undercover, and it was a really exciting article, and that's what really inspired Tilly to start writing and to start doing her own adventures like this, and to discover her sister's murderer. And so she would write to Nellie Bly so many times, and they were sometimes the most random questions, but it was so endearing about Tilly that she was that curious about what an elephant smells like. And I just loved it. I love the ending where it wrapped up, and Nellie did visit her, and she told her what an elephant smelled like, and it was a beautiful moment. So I just thought that was kind of amusing and an opportunity for a joke.
And I'm glad you brought that up because some members of our book club were not really familiar with the backstory of Nellie Bly. They didn't know who she was. And, so as those letters that Tilly's writing to Nellie Bly are being incorporated throughout the book, I could kind of see, like, if you don't know who she was, that part of the book might seem a little odd,
Random,
and unnecessary and kind of random. I think, if you knew who she was already, you could kind of appreciate it. But I could definitely see if someone out there has read this book and they thought that seemed a little bit out of place, I can definitely see how that would seem like it was just one of those, things she kind of threw in there.
mm, mm.
Um,
What I also really like, and that kind of reminded me, is that she did give other little historical elements to it. Like she mentioned the story of Mercy Brown, which is a true case, and
yes.
that creeped me out because I was like, oh my goodness. And just other ones too that I wasn't familiar with. I was familiar with Mercy Brown, but I thought that was kind of interesting that throughout this she would sprinkle in like these tiny little historical facts, but they're actually true facts too. So I thought that was really well done.
Yeah. So the Mercy Brown case, that's actually part of something called the New England Vampire Panic.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially, for those of you guys out here who've not heard of this, there was a tuberculosis outbreak, and of course, tuberculosis is called consumption because it's literally like your body is just being consumed; it's being wasted away. And so some people started to think, because it was spreading so quickly in families, that infected family members were draining energy from other people in their family, that they were literally like vampires. And so this caused some really strange things to happen. Like in some cases, they would dig up deceased people who'd been infected and take out their organs and
Brutal stuff. Brutal
make
stuff.
the person who was infected and fighting for their life, drink it or consume it and think that this was going to cure them. I mean, some really strange things, but, we know that in hysterical moments in history, mobs can do pretty crazy things. So I thought that was kind of cool how she incorporated the vampire panic into the story, because that was part of the storyline. Lucy's murder was perpetrated by someone who drained her of blood, and she had two marks on her neck. So did you at any point in the book, Jane, think that the murderer was going to be a vampire?
No, I did not. The closest we got was Tom, which I was like, all right. But no, I did not think it was a vampire. I did think somebody was using that to maybe create fear or, create suspicion or something, but I wasn't sure. But no, I did not think it was a vampire.
Yeah, I didn't either. There really was no supernatural element to the story at all. So if that is something that you're looking for, then this is probably not your book.
Spoiler alert, there's no vampires.
Cape Cotter said the witches and vampire panics weren't New England's best moments.
It wasn't a look. It wasn't a look, guys.
I can tell you what your best moment was. Anyone want to guess? JFK.
How did I not think of that? How did I not see that coming, Carrie?
But yeah, that was kind of a cool historical element to it. And yeah, never for one moment did I think it was a vampire, but it was kind of neat how she worked that in, and she worked in the popularity of Bram Stoker's Dracula into the book, which was very neat because that gave it all the dark vibes that we were looking for. So I really appreciated that.
Now I kind of want to read Dracula after reading this. I'm like, because I do feel like partially it was a bit of a spin-off or inspired novel from Dracula, because the character's named Lucy, the victims. It was kind of interesting. So I think if I had read Dracula before, I'd be able to appreciate certain nuances a little more. So
Cape Cotter said 1776. Yeah, I guess that.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, that was another.
Because without that, there would be no president. John F. Kennedy. So, but what scene in this book, Jane? I think I have one in mind, but I don't know. We might not have the same one. What scene from this book really stuck with you the most?
That's a good one. You go first on that one. I have to think about that one a little bit more.
Okay. Um,
I mean, there is a scene, but I want to hear yours first to make sure it's not the same one.
the scene that really stuck with me and just caught me completely off guard is the scene where Tilly is attacked by Tom. I mean,
That's the one I was thinking too.
yeah,
It was, yeah, okay.
she is violently attacked by Tom, and it caught me off guard because Tom is a character that I didn't really think a lot about. I mean, I had sympathy for Tom because he was so sick and he was stuck in his bed, and I really did feel like he was being kept that way, you know,
Yeah.
by one or both of his parents. And at one point I thought there might be a little romance there with
The dance,
Tom,
the
with the
dancing
dance,
scene.
but
Yeah.
nothing really came of that. So I really didn't think too much about him. And all of a sudden, this supposedly sick boy has the strength to overpower Tilly, to inject her with morphine, and then to try to assault her. So I was not expecting it. It came
Yeah.
out of nowhere, and it disturbed me so much um, that I just kind of sat there and I was just kind of stunned for a minute. But I wanted to continue reading because I had to find out what happened to Tilly. I was worried about her.
Yeah.
That scene really made me worry about her.
Yeah, I completely agree. And what was really scary was like I almost felt like Tilly was a little set up in certain ways, and that horrified me because I was like, oh, this probably isn't a first time type of thing. You know what I mean? So, and just the way like certain other characters interacted and like left them alone, it kind of freaked me out when knowing the storyline of other characters later. It really, really freaked me out that it was almost like a trap was set for her. And I felt really bad. I did. I felt bad for Tilly.
Yeah. Now, and I did think about this afterwards because later in the book, Tom is very contrite about it. He's extremely apologetic. He feels horrible. And I feel like it almost kind of showed different sides of addiction, the side of addiction that can make people do very violent things that you would never expect that person to do. Um, and then, of course, Tilly's addiction, which doesn't make her forget herself completely. Like, I
Right.
don't feel like she was as much in the grips of addiction as Tom was, because Tom
Yes.
was, I mean, for all intents and purposes, Tom was pretty much on a morphine drip all day and
Yes.
getting injections. I mean, so, I feel like it illustrated that as well.
It's possible there was other items too, not just the morphine,
Yeah.
because seeing the developments of other characters and their motives, it's very possible that, it wasn't just morphine. And it makes it a very, very complex situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, And then, talking about the historical parts of this book, I really liked the incorporation of the absinthe. I thought that was kind of a neat little tidbit. And of course, on the front page, you have the slotted spoon for the absinthe, which is where you put the sugar cube on top. You sit it on top of the glass and you pour water over it to dilute the absinthe, which I think is pretty neat because actually absinthe was illegal in the US until 2007.
Oh, I did not know
Yeah.
that. That's something I didn't know.
Um, so and during the time period, of course, we're seeing in this book all of the addiction issues with opium, but it also coincides with the temperance movement. And
That's right.
so I believe there were a couple of violent murders where a husband murders a wife and he had been drinking. And one of the things that he had been drinking was absinthe. And
Mm,
so, the campaign for temperance in some of these countries kind of morphs into a campaign against absinthe because
mm,
absinthe It has herbs in it. I think wormwood is one of the herbs that they thought had a lot of medicinal properties to it. But the opponents of absinthe say it makes people hallucinate. The green fairy, which is not true. That it doesn't. It doesn't have any more of an effect on people than any other spirit. But I thought that was a pretty neat little part to the book, and it made for a really beautiful cover for sure.
I love this cover. This cover was one of the most beautiful I've ever seen.
Yeah. So,
Remind me, I think the mother was also part of the temperance movement, if I'm not mistaken.
was it Tilly's mother?
Yeah, I think it was
Or
Tilly's
yeah,
mother.
mhm.
Yes.
I think you're
So
right.
I
Yeah.
thought that was kind of interesting too, because we also see this kind of opposing dynamic of, well, we were part of the temperance movement, you shouldn't be taking that much medicine, blah blah blah. But at the same time, they didn't really mind the effects of her being docile when she was,
Right.
in that. So
When it
I thought
suited them.
exactly. So I thought that was a really interesting dynamic, that it was this push and pull with her family members. And so when I found out that the mother was part of the temperance movement, it was also kind of ironic too, because here she is in this, ideology here, and yet her own daughter is struggling very, very, very much with it. So I thought that was kind of an interesting dynamic as well. And you wouldn't see it if you weren't looking for it, but I thought that was kind of an interesting little tidbit too.
Yeah, for sure. Um, were there any other people in the book that you were suspicious of?
I thought Dorothy and Hazel were very strange. So Dorothy and Hazel, they're friend. Well, I believe Dorothy is the friend of Tilly, and her like lady's maid, her companion is Hazel, and so they basically go around society, and there's a storyline with them. But I thought it was really interesting because I knew there was something kind of odd with their friendship with Tilly, and also James's friendship slash courtship with Tilly. And I just got this really icky feeling whenever they were around. So what did you think, Carrie?
Yeah, you know, I can't say I was suspicious of Dorothy, but I did question her motivations. I mean, I just thought that Dorothy was trying to sabotage Tilly's relationship with James because I just got
Mm,
the desperate vibe from Dorothy. I mean, I
yes.
just got this desperation out of her that she had to get married and she wanted to get married to James, and she was just trying to sabotage any meetup that Tilly and James had. So that's what I got out of Dorothy. But Hazel was a different story.
Yes.
Hazel, I was very suspicious of her because she, um, was an enabler of Tilly. It was like she was trying to keep Tilly in a stupor.
Hmm.
And Hazel and James were just way too familiar.
Yes.
Their mannerisms, how they addressed each other, the fact that I believe there was even points where they touched each other slightly,
Yes.
which
Like hand on the
1890,
shoulder, which I was like,
yeah, 1899, that's like, whoa,
hold up,
that's like
guys.
a proclamation of love right there. So I was very suspicious of her. And then also, and I'm going to pop up Cape Codder's input here, John. Now, John was basically hired as a security guard by Tilly's family after her sister's murder. And yeah, John seemed creepy to me. His interactions with Tilly, um, it, you know, I thought he might be one of those characters that would kind of come out of nowhere at the end and be the killer.
Mm,
I thought, there's a possibility there just because he was so creepy.
mm.
But, in the end, we find out not all is as it seems. And we have to remember, and I kept forgetting this, we have to remember that Tilly is on drugs.
That's true.
Her mind is not clear.
Hmm.
She's literally not seeing clearly, which is kind of funny if you know what happens with John. But
Hmm.
she's really not seeing clearly,
I
and
see what you did there, Carrie. I see what you
yeah,
did there.
and so I was just taking everything that she felt and said at face value, and then at the end of the book, I'm like, wait a minute, you know, she, at the end of the book, she had written this article for the newspaper, this, very first article and it was a grand success, but she didn't even remember writing it.
Yeah.
And, she later says, if I had been sober, if I had been clear headed, I would have written a better article probably. Even though the article was well done, obviously could have been better if she had been clear headed.
Mhm.
But yeah, he was definitely creepy. I can't think of anyone else. Hello, Tom. Good to see you.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for stopping in. Hi.
Yeah. Um, we already mentioned JFK, Tom. You missed it.
Tom,
We were talking about the fact that the witches and the vampire panics weren't New England's best moments, and of course, I had to bring up John F. Kennedy as one of New England's best moments. But I guess we'll say, if you don't want to know what happens at the end, definitely skip out now because I'm going to talk about the ending.
Mhm.
What did you think of that ending, Jane?
To be completely honest, I had actually thought for like the briefest second, like literally a millisecond at the beginning of the book when um, we were at the doctor's office, it came across my brain. I was like, what if this person's the murderer? But I couldn't figure out the why because it was a little bit backwards when you thought about it. So that just got ramped up. Like this book goes from like 0 to 60 in 3.5 seconds. Like we talked about like the assault scene, and we also are talking about that ending because it turned it so scary and violent so quickly that I was like, oh my goodness. I thought it was a very, very interesting way to end the book. I'm still kind of chewing on the whys of it. But yeah, I thought it was actually a pretty, pretty smart way to end it. What did you think, Gary?
I think so too. And I really think the book changed with Tom's attack on Tilly. I feel like
Yes.
it became more of a thriller from that point on in the book. It was a lot more fast paced. Not that this was a really slow paced book, but I feel like that part really amped up, like you said. And there was quite a bit of action and violence going on. Tilly's kidnapped.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and with the ending, it is revealed that Dr. Erickson's wife is the murderer. And I really thought that was pretty clever because it did line up with our thoughts about Munchausen syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
It definitely lined up with that. But she was a person that you are made to feel sympathy for throughout the book because most of the time when we see her, she is being either yelled at or berated or hit by Dr. Erickson.
Mm-hmm.
And she is nothing but nice and friendly and accommodating to his patients. And she seems a little kind of downtrodden and scared and nervous throughout the book. So I really felt like that was a pretty great reveal, and she goes full on crazy. I mean, she, you know, is taking this blood from people who've recovered from illnesses, thinking that it will make Tom well. Um, and I like that part of the book too, because, all of us kind of agreed in the group that the fact that the victims had recently recovered from an illness
Yes.
was important. That was
Mm-hmm.
that was a vital clue. So I liked that was pulled back into it. Um, and I do get what you're saying about the why, but I feel like, you know, she's this battered woman, and
That's
the
true.
only person she has is Tom.
Right.
And her
See,
whole goal is to, love and take care of him, which it kind of works two ways in her mind because she wants to keep him sick almost so that he
yeah,
stays with her. But then she wants to do these crazy things to supposedly make him well and build up
yeah,
his immunity.
yeah,
So, I mean, I think it's the, um, very deranged sort of thinking
yeah.
of,
That's what
uh,
tripped me up because,
yeah,
like Munchausen, I could understand. Like if she wanted to keep her boy around, I totally got that. But some of the things that, she said, well, this is going to make him better. It's going to make him better. It's going to make him better. And I'm like, all right, which is this? Which way are we going here, guys? Like,
Right.
no, but I do think that was to illustrate that she was not in her right senses or anything like that, and that was a peek into how she could do all these really really bad things if that was her thought process. Um, but yeah, that kind of tripped me up because I'm like, well, it's Munchausen syndrome, but
But it's
not.
not. Yeah.
Yeah, it was that I was a little like because I did think Munchausen's like pretty early on, with oh he's always sick. I'm always here to take care of him. Here's his tea, and but like he was always sick, like always, and a doctor's son being always sick,
Yeah.
so it just I that did flood into my mind a little bit, but the whole reasoning behind it was a little bit hard for me to follow.
Yeah.
Mm.
No, Katie said it made enough sense that she wasn't mad about it.
Yeah.
You know, there were enough clues, and I felt that way too. And yeah, Katie, when she got to the assault part, she was like, "Okay, guys, I'm going to finish this book tonight." And I
Yes,
was like, "Okay, good,"
you go, Katie,
because
you do it. Yeah.
when I got to that point too, I was like, "Okay, I'm going to finish the book now too." So, yeah, that was great, a great way to end the book. I felt like
Do you know what I just realized though? It's that
what?
she was constantly having the absinthe too. So I'm almost wondering if she was also a person that had a lot of struggle with with substance like that.
Yeah,
Because remember she was like getting like drunk off absinthe, which I mean the book kind of tells you that like you don't need a lot, and she was like chugging it down,
yeah.
and then all of
And
the bottles like next to the body. I was like, oh, maybe she's also struggling with what Tilly was struggling with.
And that kind of plays into the whole belief of that era that absinthe was this, green fairy that could make people do these violent things, right? We have to ban it because it causes husbands to murder their wives.
Mm.
So yeah, I feel like, even though there's no evidence to support that at all, that it
No.
just has the same effects of any other alcohol, which alcohol can, cause people to, you know, lower inhibitions and get hurt or hurt people and then not remember. So, um, but maybe even just believing for a second that this thing that she's taking could cause her to do crazy things. I don't know. That may have even played
It's
into how crazy she gets with these antics
yeah.
because, yeah, she was, I mean,
She was like sing-songy and she was like aggressive and it just was like a total 180 that I'm like, huh? So,
yeah, yeah. Hey, Mark, good to see
hey,
ya.
how are you? Thanks for stopping in.
Um, So I guess that's all I had as far as talking points for this book. Are there any? I take that back. I take that back. There's one thing we have to cover: the mystery of parentage. Because throughout this book, the
Yes.
two sisters, Lucy and Tilly, are treated a bit differently, by their grandmama, and it is revealed later in the book that they did not have the same father, that Lucy, um, was of unknown parentage. Uh, and Cape Cod was asking if we thought about who Lucy's father was. I did look back in the book because I thought it mentioned some form of royalty.
Yeah,
And
something like that. Yeah.
it does say Tilly's talking to her mother and she says, Lucy knew, didn't she? And the mother says, she saw him, her father, at a ball. He was visiting from Europe. I'll say that much. He's not American. She saw the resemblance immediately. So I don't know. That made me think, some sort of upper class, someone with a title,
Oh,
someone who
yes.
had reason not to acknowledge this American and her child. I don't know. So I don't know that we'll know. I don't know that the author had someone in mind, but that is a very mysterious clue.
It is, yes. Yeah, I felt that that kind of played like second a little bit to everything else. I personally don't think that was as hashed out as well as it could have been. I thought it was an interesting aspect, and it definitely may have played into why they were treated so differently. But it also, that idea of that maybe Lucy's father was royalty would say that Lucy was being treated a little bit better than Tilly, where Tilly's father was poor. So this could be a total like class dynamic thing with it with the grandmother. Um, but yeah, I wasn't quite sure on where that whole thing fit within the story.
Yeah, and I agree. She didn't really flesh that out as well because we
Mhm.
do know that Lucy's father is different than Tilly's, but the man that raised them both and that acknowledged them both as his daughters, um, they hint that he may have had some Chinese ancestry. Now, Tilly and her family does not acknowledge this. They don't appear to have any Chinese heritage. But I thought that was very interesting because when you think about that in the context of this whole discussion about opium, you know,
Mm, mm,
in the late 1800s, when most opium users were middle and upper class white women, it was treated a lot differently than a couple decades later. A couple decades later, doctors start to realize that maybe it's not great, so they kind of lessen up on the prescribing of it. But then we see in these working class areas that some Chinese opium dens start to open. And we see working class people turning to opium as a source of relief, pain relief and just relief from their
mhm.
daily lives. And it's only then that we really start to see
Well, this is an issue.
legislation
Yeah.
being pushed and it becoming kind of a criminal sort of thing. So I found that very interesting. I mean, she doesn't really delve into that in the book, but just knowing what I know about the history and then the fact that Tilly's father may have had some Chinese, ancestry there. And, it just made me think about it.
Just thinking also, and this is totally different, but if I recall, wasn't there a scene where Tilly had to go to the morgue and there was like the unknown dead like behind glass or something? Do you remember that scene?
Yes.
That,
Yes.
and I think that was an actual like thing, and people would, and it took me back when they said, "Oh, it was for entertainment too, for to claim that your dad and entertainment." And I had seen that in another book somewhere that that was actually a form of entertainment back then, is to go, it's like
Oh,
an actual obituary, but you literally go see who has passed away. And I thought that was incredibly gory, but I really appreciated that she added in that grotesque element because the macabre was a part of this at that time. They were really, really kind of fascinated with death and with murder, to be honest. So that was kind of interesting. And that's another aspect where there's little historical hints, like what you were just saying. There's the historical hint on, where this went, with different cultures later on. And I thought that was one of the best parts of this book, is that every single turn had this little tiny bit of history thought behind it. So I just appreciate that. Jogged my memory too, because I was like, oh yeah, that's another little historical thing. So
yes, for sure. And yeah, from stuff we've read before, Dr. Cream comes to mind. That whole era, people were obsessed with true crime and they were
yeah.
obsessed with um, kind of the gory details, which I guess I'll go ahead and announce that the June Black Hearts Book Club read will be Gory Details. And I forget the author, so I will post it. I'll probably post like a YouTube short just showing the book cover and everything. But that is a nonfiction book. And that's what we'll be reading in June. So lots of little gory details from science and history. So yeah, I'm really excited about that one. And Lady Jane has agreed to also co host the June book club pick with me. So I'm really excited. And I hope that some of you guys will join in on that one too. If you're interested, please shoot us a comment on this video or any of the others, and I'll make sure you are in the chat. Um, But yeah, I had so much fun reading this book, and I just want to thank Cape Cotter and also Katie from Katie Reads and Rants, who were in the chat and were super active and had lots of great insights and picked up on lots of clues and different things that I didn't pick up on. So it's always nice to hear from other buddy readers. And
Oh, the
yeah,
the parentage. Yeah.
yeah.
Yes, Katie, absolutely.
And Mark, thank you. Thank you for doing a little search for me.
Ah,
That is the author for Gory Details. So awesome. I'm so glad you're joining, Katie. And
yes.
actually, Katie is going to co host, I think, the month of September with me.
Nice.
So she's going to pick a thriller. Um, we both read thrillers. So, and I noticed when I was looking at the year and what I'd picked, I didn't have a thriller. So I was like, that's perfect. Let's go ahead and pick a thriller. And actually,
Yeah.
Mark at Book Time with Elvis, he's going to do, I think it's December with me. And we are reading a nonfiction book called Dead Mountain. And that's about the Dyatlov Pass incident. So, yeah,
Ooh, that's interesting.
absolutely, Mark. You can certainly join for that one. That would be awesome. So, really
Yay.
excited for that.
So many
Uh,
exciting things happening at Black Hearts Book Club.
Yay. All right. Well, Jane, do you have anything else? Any last words? Anything you want to say?
I was really satisfied with this book. It definitely held my attention and it gave me all of the creepy vibes that I was hoping for it to give me. And I thought it was very, very well written and atmospheric.
Absolutely. And it kind of it reminded me a little bit of another book I read in the last few months called Stalking Jack the Ripper.
Mm.
It had a lot of those vibes, but I feel like I liked the Tilly character a little bit better because I feel like she fit more in the time period. But
More realistic.
yeah, had all of those creepy vibes, and I loved it. So thank you all so much for participating, and thank you, Jane. Thank you, Jane, for doing the live show with me. It was so much fun.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Carrie. And I'm so excited about the next installment of Black Hearts Book Club.
Alrighty. Bye, guys. We'll see you next time.
Bye.